everybody, and welcome to this episode of It's a Fair Question. This time around, I'm super excited to be talking to Robert Robertson. Robert comes out of the Scottish traditional music scene, but is now the singer and the guitarist with Scottish band Tide Lines, who are going from strength to strength and have built up a wonderful following and are producing some great music. So with Robert, I'm going to talk about music, I'm going to talk about his roots in the West Highlands, and I'm going to talk about his faith foundations. Much to look forward to on this edition of It's a Fair Question. So Robert, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of It's a Fair Question. I'm delighted that you've found some time to do that. So listen, you're at a really good place in your music career. Your band, Tide Lines, is riding high. Gigs sell out within minutes. Your album came right in the charts, very high up, number 3 in the charts. You've got 50,000 followers just about on your Facebook site. So how's it feeling that the project's going so well?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like quite an exciting sort of period for us, especially in Scotland. We've managed to develop a following that can mean, when, you know, as you say, we get some pretty nice gigs out of it, and there's people there that want to hear our music when we release new stuff. But equally, you know, in other parts of the UK and Europe and stuff, we're still at, you know, a very sort of early stage in our development, and that's equally exciting as well. So it's still it's one of those things. It's just really exciting to see how it's going and where it'll go.
I can imagine, but here's the question I want to ask. So you're based now mainly in Glasgow. So when you're walking down Byres Road in the West End, are there folks coming up and wanting your autograph, or are you still kind of flying under the radar a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to go out in costumes yet, you know. That's the thing. You could think that you're doing quite well in the music industry because on social media you can have, let's say, 50,000 people following you, but then you realise that's just a drop in a very big ocean. Yeah, sure. But like, I mean, back home in the Highlands and the islands and things, there's a lot of islands that we'll go to play, and you know, it's great. There's a lot of support for our kind of music up there, and there's maybe half a dozen bands that are what you probably think sort of household names walking down the street up there, but certainly down in the central belt, it's not quite the same.
Well, it kind of sounds like maybe that suits you. I read one of the reviews of the band, and it said these guys are not trying to be like a boy band in the kind of contemporary sense of that word, and it said even their own publicity photographs makes them look exceptionally unfashionable. I love that as a phrase. I mean, you could take that as an insult, but I would have thought you maybe think, well, that's cool, that's really what we're about. We're not trying to be an image, you know, it's about the music. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's funny, I know exactly the review you're talking about, and at the time, it was at the time of the album release, and we got a number of reviews in the national press, which was really, really exciting, you know, like the UK national press as well. And I think we got 4 really, really big ones in national newspapers, and it was just total excitement. And the first 2 came in, or the first 3 came in, and they were just really, really positive. And you begin to forget that there is always the chance that one comes in that's negative. And so we read this one, and as you say, it was actually meant, it was a positive review, but the very first line said something like, "Tide Lines are the most unfashionable band I've ever seen," or something. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm holding my head in my hands. But when I went on to read it, the point the guy, as you say, was trying to make was that, you know, I think a lot of the music industry today is kind of created purely to be fashionable and to sell, and I mean, I think we'd be lying if we didn't say there's a wee bit of that. And when we write songs, we're obviously wanting something that's going to be popular and it's going to you know, people can react to. But we're writing from a pretty natural place, I think, and I think there's types of music and types of lyrics and things that I probably couldn't write. I just write what naturally sort of comes to me.
Sure. And, within the music world, people always talk about the second album. How's that going to work? Because, you can put your great songs out on that first album. Were you nervous about the second album, Eye of the Storm, how it was going to be received? And how was that playing in your mind?
We were, yeah. It's funny, there's a saying that I'm going to paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, you've got a lifetime to write your first album and then 5 minutes to write your second album, or something like that. But in many ways, we did it the other way round, because we rushed our first album. Myself and one of the other boys in the band, Ross, he's from the island of Mull. We had been playing in the traditional music industry for a number of years, and we'd played with a band called Skippinish. And when we started Up Tidelines, because of that, we sort of had a reasonable fan base that were sort of waiting on what our next move was going to be. So we released a single, and off the back of that single, it's called Far Side of the World, we got a full summer of festival gigs, which was great, but it presented the problem that we only had one song that was out there. So we really had to rush to get an album out in order that we could get on stage and play a 45-minute set of songs that people had heard before. And thankfully, that first album seemed to go down very well with the fan base that we developed, and it really helped us progress as a band. And then we thought, right, we're going to take our time over this second album now. And it was actually, the first album was 2017, so it's taken us 3 years to get our second album out, which, going back to the original point I was making, is almost unheard of in the music industry. Normally you take ages to do your first one, and then there's huge pressure to get your second one out. I think our third one will probably be out a lot quicker. I don't think it will be another 3 years before it's released.
And I think a lot of people will look forward to that as well. So, how did you get into music? Were you showing a piano or a guitar when you were a wee boy, or was it within choir singing, within traditional Scottish genres? So, what was your starting point in music?
My starting point was when I was really, really young. I think I was pretty much singing before I could talk, just totally naturally. It wasn't something that I was pushed into in any way, but my mum and dad are both really into music. My dad loves Scottish folk music. He used to bring me up when I was a wee kid listening to the Corries, and my mum plays the piano. And there's a story, I think, when my mum was a wee girl, my grandfather was a farmer down in Stirling, and he apparently she always really wanted to play the accordion. And he was really they were really like Scottish dance, like Take the Floor, and even back to the days of the White Heather Club and Andy Stewart and all this. Yeah. And my grandpa Dan had taken home from the market one day an accordion that he'd got at the market, and my mum had gone to play it, and she'd opened it up and there was a hole in the bellows. So she ended up, I think she learnt the piano eventually. And so my first instrument was the accordion, actually, that my granny and grandpa bought for me. And that really set me off on a path of traditional music, and I always had the enjoyment of singing. And then when I got to about maybe 11, 12 years old, I was kind of going around in local areas in Lochaber singing at Cayley's, and naturally I got into the Gaelic side of things, which hadn't been originally, because my mum and dad are both from Stirling, so they don't have Gaelic at all. So I wasn't a native speaker. But I really got into the Gaelic thing, and then you mentioned choirs and the mod and things like that took over, and I started getting into that side of it. So yeah, it was always kind of traditional music, Scottish music that I was brought up with.
But underneath that, I always wonder, was there somebody in there that wanted to be on the stage with a guitar and the crowds in front of you in the kind of pop rock world? Was that sort of burning to get out of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was always, I think I was, looking back, probably always a bit of an attention seeker. I used to, if we ever had folk round at the house or anything, they'd have to sit while I got up and gave them a tune in the box and a song, and then eventually I started learning the guitar to accompany my singing. And I'm talking about traditional music here. It wasn't all traditional folk. I used to listen to a lot of pretty kind of older sort of pop and rock. My dad was pretty keen on kind of 60s 60s music and also like the stuff that's got a wee folk crossover. you know, like bands like, I don't know, like the Kingston Trio and stuff. That's a really old name, but music like that. And I think somewhere I used to really like Billy Joel and you know, 70s, 80s stuff as well. And I think so somewhere there was always the potential that eventually I was going to get a band and try and do something that was more mainstream.
Yeah. I'm loving the thought of being an attention seeker. Listen, you're speaking to a minister. I mean, if we there must be that within us somewhere, ministers. Wouldn't want to admit it, but maybe it's deep within us to be stood at the front somewhere. So let's talk a wee bit more about the music now that Tidelines is producing. I have to say, I'm not just saying it because you're here. I love the music. The first time I heard Far Side of the World, it really got me emotional. Our oldest son is living in Australia, and even that phrase, far side of the world, you know, put me in mind. And then just the great lines, to feel the breeze of the Hebrides. It's rooted in this country, which I personally love so much. So that's the tone of your music. It's about life, it's about love, it's about people, it's about the land. It's certainly Scottish. So talk to us a wee bit, Robert, about the music and how it sort of bubbles up from you.
Yeah, I mean, I always admire writers who can write in other personas, you know, and adopt other personas and tell stories that aren't their own story. But I'm really not one of those writers. I can only write about kind of my own experience, my own emotions. And when I first put that album to the first Tidelines album together, Dreams We Never Lost, I'd been down in Glasgow. I'd been down in Glasgow for 4 or 5. In fact, there's a line in one of the songs, 4 long years since I left this town. So it must have been 4 years when I started writing the songs, and then it's probably a year or 2 later that the album came out. But I was in this kind of strange. I'd graduated at uni down here, and my plan had been, you know, leave the Highlands, go to Glasgow, get your degree at Glasgow Uni and see what happens. And at that point, I'd realised, actually, I was loving Glasgow so much, I wanted to stay here. But then it was a massive kind of part in my life, because I was like, wow, you know, 4 years previously, I'd been so nervous about leaving the Highlands and coming down to Glasgow. And there's always this huge kind of sort of thing in my mind between the pull of going home and being somewhere where I could breathe fresh air and look at the mountains and go walking and you know, out in the open, but also the excitement of the city. And they've both got their pros and cons. And I think that first album, it really just totally naturally it came about that was a kind of running theme throughout it. And of course, it's it is Scottish. It's very, I mean, it's a huge Scottish thing, that love of the land. But actually, the more we travel, you know, we've been lucky enough to go to a number of different places around the world, but mainly in Europe so far. And rural communities there, people always say that they really feel the same kind of emotions that are in those songs. So it's kind of universal in a sense, which wasn't a deliberate thing at all.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, all of that makes sense to someone who's listened to the music. It really does. Why don't we play one of the tracks now? Innocent Beautiful, one of your most recent songs.
Born in the eye of the storm, in somebody's story, growing old, growing young. Now, just trying to pretend that if we keep on trying, we'll be here in the end. So before the night is over, will you dance a little closer while the crowd move all around us? We can stay. Can we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On our own, walking hand in hand again tonight. we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On and on, walking hand in hand again tonight. Can we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On and on, walking hand in hand again tonight. Here lies a wandering heart, a travelling raindrop falling back to the start. Lying alone in your arms, with nothing to hold us back from the years with their twists and their turns. So before the night is over, will you dance a little closer while the crowd move all around us? We can stay. Can we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On and on, walking hand in hand again tonight. Can we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On and on, walking hand in hand again tonight. Can we sing this song for the innocent and beautiful? On and on, walking hand in hand again tonight.
Yeah, great. So thanks for letting us share that song, Robert. Love the video, love the song. It's just so enthusiastic. You know, that's what comes over for much of your music. For me, it's like you guys really live it and love it. Tell us a wee bit about that song and how the video came together, all those folks with the lyrics.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bob Dylan before you played it there, because it was that video, Bob Dylan, Subterranean Homesick Blue, I think it was, where and that kind of inspired it. It was the drummer in the band Gus that brought that up, and we kind of thought nowadays a lyric video is quite a common thing. You know, all the big artists that are on record labels, when they release a song, there's a lyric video that goes out, and there's creative ways of doing it. But that Bob Dylan one, we were kind of thinking among ourselves that possibly that was the first ever lyric video, just with him just holding up the board. So yeah, it came at a time where we had to release a single in order to announce, or to we'd already announced, but in order to promote the fact that we had an album coming out. And we had no way to release a music video because we were all just locked in our own houses and flats. So yeah, we just put this plea out to the fans. We said, we need you to help us. And what we said was, we want you to we'll send you a word to hold up, and you saw them do that. But we also said, and then if you could send in a picture of anything that you think is innocent and beautiful. And of course, you know, an example we gave was perhaps you could send in a photo of yourself as a child, or a photo of a pet, or a photo of a grandchild, or whatever. And yeah, so you saw the result of it there. It's my favourite video that we've done. And it's got the four of us at the start as well as we kids. But there's just something really that makes me smile about it. And all sorts of different people had sent in stuff, like there's a guy that's like holding onto a lamppost and stuff. And it's just unbelievable. There's dogs and everything in it.
I love it's the band and it's the fans as one, you know, and you know, that's absolutely great. It's not a sort of multi-million-pound production, you know, set in some exotic location in the world. It's just the folk that love your music, you know, alongside you. So it's lovely. Thanks for allowing us to share it here. Robert, I wonder how it contrasts coming from Lochaber and now you're in Glasgow. And, you know, we think of 21st century Scotland, it's a very secular kind of place. And yet maybe if we thought there was somehow still some rootedness in faith, I mean, it might be that we would think towards the west and, you know, the northwest of our country, the Highlands and Islands. I wonder if you'd talk a wee bit about that. I mean, were you raised within a kind of faith community yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've always faith and the church has always been a part of my life, and although, believe it or not, both of the things I'm going to talk about actually relate more to down here than up in the Highlands. My local minister when I was a wee boy was Mr. McQuarrie, Donald McQuarrie, and he, I think, originally is from North Uist, but or his family, and he's got Gaelic, and so he was the minister when I was growing up and at Sunday school, so he was a big influence on me. But believe it or not, he's originally from like although his family are from North Uist, he was originally himself from Partick, and I actually believe that he was brought up on this very street that I now live on. I'm sure he told me that years ago. But anyway, also a lot of my experience of the church and faith comes from my mum and dad, and they were both brought up in Stirling, and my grandpa on my mum's side was a senior elder at St Ninian's Old Parish, with the minister there, Reverend Gary McIntyre. He's quite a good friend of our family as well. So yeah, I mean, I've always been sort of surrounded by family and friends to whom faith is a huge part of their lives, and that's kind of always been the case with me as well, and that's I mean, I'm not sure how much that manifests itself in my music, probably because, as I say, I don't write anything with any particular deliberate idea of writing. I just write what's on my mind, but it certainly has been a help in a number of occasions. For example, before a massive gig, if I'm nervous, or before, or if we've got something particularly difficult to do as a band, or a difficult decision to make. I don't think God and faith are ever far away from how I sort of think.
Yeah, really interesting to hear you say that, and I guess it's not explicit in your lyrics, but it seems to me that it's rooted in it as well. So much of what I envision when I'm listening to your songs speaks to me of faith, and so I'm interested to hear you talking about that, and that it can still be real in terms of before a gig, there's nerves around, and you've maybe just got that within you, just helps you settle. Yeah,
and I think also what you said about the Highlands and the Islands, and it is true that there's still, it's probably still a stronger part of the community up there than it is in other parts of the country. And so I suppose that's helped, because that part of the world has shaped my understanding of life so much that that's probably an aspect of it as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, Robert, it's been lovely talking. I know you'll have other stuff to do, so I'm not going to overly prolong our time together. I'm just delighted again that you were willing to chat for a little bit as part of this series. Now, how I want to finish is this. The moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland traditionally always, during the week of the General Assembly, attends the Gaelic service and has the challenge of saying the traditional blessing in Gaelic. Now, given that the vast majority of moderators have no Gaelic at all, it's a challenge, and I know it gets them nervous, hoping they get it right. Well, I missed that opportunity, so maybe some point in my year I'll get the chance to try and say it. But listen, you're a Gaelic speaker, you've spoken about it, so you've got the blessing there. So why don't you say it in Gaelic now, the words of the blessing, and that will just neatly bring this together.
Yeah, okay. So I can see exactly what you're saying about ministers who don't speak Gaelic, because even for someone like myself who's learnt it, there's a few tongue twisters in this one, so we'll go for it. But here we go. It goes Gyro bianach an tíirne ula cuachgich, bianach an ahad, agus a vich, agus an spirit nuv, maliadiv ula, inisht, agus gushiadi. Amen.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. I'll say it back for those that maybe are not familiar. The blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with you all now and always. Well, listen, I don't speak any Gaelic. I love the language, even though it doesn't mean anything to me by way of the translation. It just seems to come from a deep place. So thank you for sharing that blessing with us. And can I wish you well with your career, with your life, and I hope our paths will cross at some time to come. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me on as part of this. I'm delighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Take care.